One of the uh, characteristics of narcissistic behaviour is that the person who is exhibiting it has some difficulties with their own emotional regulation, and they learnt that as a child to push away the emotions that were not able to be tolerated or not acceptable. And many of you will be aware of the 4 Fs: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And a lot of narcissistic behaviour comes under the fight response, bullying, um, and what is happening here is that the the person as a child was not able to let themselves feel frightened. It was just um, too disorientating to their sense of self, and so anything that evoked fear in them has to be offloaded, and it gets offloaded in picking on others and seeing the expression of that terror in their victim. So that's the physical bullying that most of us are aware of, but emotional bullying is much harder to detect, and that is part of the reason for doing it, is that there's a need to hide this huge frustration and anger and outrage, um, but underneath that is the fear of exposure of uh, their their fear. And many of you who've been watching these videos will have seen there's quite a lot of comments from Kay Arnold, who in a way is displaying some of this behaviour. It, it's a it's what we often see in children. They needle another child. They trying to provoke an angry reaction, and when they get that, it soothes the feeling that is underneath that anger. So it's hard to know what really is going on with Kay Arnold, because any uh, attempts to uh, understand their true motivation for spending so much time and energy dismissing me are stonewalled. But if we just think what their most intense responses seem to be when I post something that highlights the unlawful behaviour of the Tenancy Tribunal in Auckland. And it may not necessarily be particularly widespread, but both experiences that I have had in Northland and the second one in Auckland, in Devonport, were both cases where they were commercial premises. And in the first case, they were charging GST. The adjudicator was aware of it. The argument was that they were a commercial premises, and they used the Residential Tenancies Act to to protect them. And the same is true in Devonport. So that's the issue that I'm writing about. And the intense responses tend to erupt in response to that. So it's important in this time that we're in history, because many of the institutions and the authority figures that we've had are proving to be more openly dishonest and misusing their power than perhaps has been in the past. And this is that a belief run by a belief that they can get away with it. They're entitled to behave in this way. And so when someone presents information that actively provides a dissonance to that, it's very frightening for them, because there's a threat of exposure, there's a threat of a financial loss, and so people, this is kind of the childlike response to that, which they learnt as children. This Kay Arnold has obviously learnt to behave this way, and it has worked for her as a child. Whether it's going to work for her as an adult, who knows? It's unlikely that if people are prepared to lie and cover things up, that any case involving me is going to be successful. But in a way, that's not really the point. The point is that for people to understand more of the mechanisms of these ways for the child to avoid feeling vulnerable, because their whole survival would have been threatened, and they've grown up seeking power for that very reason. And you can see this in global leaders as well. One of the ways that I used to work with this in the groups in the prison was to actually to help those that held the most power in the group, the gang leaders, to experience a sense of vulnerability and not need to act out. So let's say Kay Arnold was in the group. That would be my intention, to help them feel that actually this is a strategy that's preventing them from being at peace with themselves. And because what we forget is that when we are content in ourselves, when we don't feel we have to prove ourselves, we have there's no necessity to have to put down someone else. We might want to put in boundaries, and in a way, this is part of what the issue is that when someone is provoking someone else, they are seeing that person as the receptacle of their emotion. So there's a lack of boundary, there's a merging. But this can only be a successful strategy when the recipient accepts them And many of us have been trained in our families to accept that kind of behaviour because our parents have been struggling with things themselves. So it's important to understand these dynamics, especially if you're working with people who maybe don't have so much of an obvious trauma history with physical violence or sexual violence, but they are continually experiencing problems with relationships and being betrayed, um, infidelity against them or with them, and the involvement with people who are actively addicted. So I hope that's helpful.